Welcome everyone to South Huron Council Chambers this evening for a public meeting. And we'll ask everyone in the room if they can make sure their cell phones are off or muted. And we welcome everyone in the gallery and those that are participating from home. And we will begin this with a roll call from members of council. We'll ask each member to advise. Councillor Oak.
Here.
Councillor Neeb.
Here.
Councillor Dietrich.
Here.
Councillor Vaughn. Councillor Deputy Mayor Dietrich.
Here.
Thank you. We have all members of council and our staff are present. And I ask that there's any disclosure of pecuniary interest at this time. Not seeing any. Thank you. We move on to the purpose of the public meeting, item number 3. And Madam Clerk.
The purpose of this public meeting of the Council of the Corporation of the Municipality of South Huron is to consider and review a proposed zoning bylaw and official plan amendment under sections 17 and 34 of the Planning Act. This meeting is to also allow interested members of the public the opportunity to ask questions or offer comments on the application. Council will not make a decision on the proposed amendment at this public meeting, but based on recommendations and information received at this public meeting, the proposed amendment will be presented for approval at a regular council meeting. The public registry for the application is located by the door and will be held by myself, the acting clerk. If any member of the public would like to be notified in writing of the decision, they are to provide their name and mailing address. A person or public body may appeal the decision to the Ontario Land Tribunal if they have made an oral submission at this public meeting or a written submission to council prior to the passing of the bylaw.
Thank you. We welcome Mr. Metzger. Mr. Metzger, how are you today?
Very good. Thank you, Mayor Finch.
Yeah, please proceed whenever you're ready.
There, I think that did it. I was trying to make sure that my Zoom screen doesn't show up. So this public meeting is for a housing update to the South Huron official plan and zoning bylaw. The purpose is to update the policies and provisions in both of those documents, and it comes about as a result of a number of recent changes. There's been changes to the provincial policy statement that was done in 2020. The county official plan was updated in 2021, and there's been new provincial legislation over the last few years. Bill 108, Bill 23, all aimed at increasing housing options and the amount of housing available across the province. And then finally, council itself gave direction to staff last year to bring forth a revision to the zoning bylaw to facilitate residential development at an increased density. So the update itself, it does introduce more flexible housing options. There's 2 primary examples. Those are additional residential units in our towns, villages, and agricultural settings, and also to provide for intensification within our existing urban neighborhoods. In addition, there's a few minor changes to both documents, and that's in advance of next year's planned official plan review. In terms of public consultation, there was newspaper and radio advertising for not only this public meeting, but there was an open house held as well earlier in the month. That was on Wednesday, October 18th from 10 till 6 p.m. That was well attended. There was 15 members of the public who attended, had an opportunity to meet with the planners and staff and talk about what the proposed amendments are, answer any questions they may have as well. We did advertising on our website, the South Huron website. There was a dedicated page. That page included a response form if people wanted to provide comments through that means. And we did access our social media and promoted both the open house, the public meeting tonight, and the fact that the review is underway to provide the housing update to both documents as well. So in terms of the public consultation comments we've received, there's been a general recognition, I think, of the need for additional housing opportunities. And there were comments in support of additional residential units. There was a suggestion for a need for increased parking requirements for our lower density housing types, single detached dwellings, for example, as well as some community facility uses, arenas, hospitals, clinics. That person identified that they see some issues in terms of not having sufficient parking for some of those uses. There was a comment about the need for more affordable housing in the form of co-op housing in particular, and identified how successful that has been locally. There was also a concern expressed that the amendments are far-reaching and major in scope, and that they should be part of the upcoming official plan review rather than a separate update like is currently proposed, and that those updates should come after the water and wastewater master plan update is completed, which is currently ongoing by the municipality. Before I move on to that next slide, I should note there was another comment received just over the weekend from a member of the public that's been included with the agenda package today. That particular item identified a number of questions, concerns. It was the same person who raised the issue around parking requirements. That was reiterated with a little bit more information this time. There were questions around addressing accessibility as part of rebuilds, not just new builds. Unfortunately, that's not something that gets addressed through zoning, but it can be dealt with as part of the site plan control process. Comments around the shared driveways. That's two driveways that are side by side with no space in between, that they should be treated as if they were two separate driveways to make sure that they're wide enough. In fact, the bylaw does set a minimum width for driveways at 3 meters. So if half the driveways on one property and half on the other, it actually needs to be 6 meters wide. So the 3 meters happens to be the same width as our parking space if you were parking up against a wall. If it's in the middle of a parking lot, it's only 2.7 meters. If it's up against a wall, it's 3 meters. The concern raised about the shared driveways was people opening their doors and banging into their neighbors' cars. They should be able, within that 3 meters, to park such that that doesn't happen, or it's like they were parking up against the wall. They do need to be careful when they open their doors. There was a comment about basement windows, that they should be planned to be large enough so that in the future, someone could convert the basement to an additional residential unit. That's not something that's addressed through zoning. It is addressed through the Ontario Building Code. It's hard to set a window size when you're first building a house if you don't know what that additional residential unit's going to be, since the window sizes are based on the type of living space and how large it is. So depending on the size of your bedroom, that impacts your window size, whether it's a living area. There's just too many variables to be able to set that before somebody actually wants to build the ARU. But it is something that builders should be aware of to make sure that if they're contemplating that the possibility of an ARU, that they size those windows appropriately. There was a question about whether clinics and professional offices are allowed in the same building, and the answer to that is yes. We do allow them both in the same building. In addition, between the time period when I was before council to speak to initiating this review and tonight, there were some additional proposed amendments that I'm bringing forward. First would be to set the parking requirements for triplex and quadruplex dwellings, going through the bylaw again in that intervening period during the public consultation. We noticed that triplexes and quadruplexes don't currently have a specific parking requirement set for them. They fall into the general, if you're not listed above, 1 parking space per 40 square meters. Depending on the building, that could lead to larger parking requirements than are what is normally required. Normally, we require 1 per dwelling unit, and that's what's proposed with this additional proposed amendment. The other part with going through the bylaw, the zones are not in alphabetical order for some reason. So if you're trying to find the CF zone, for example, or any of the commercial zones, they're not up near the front of the bylaw. They're actually beyond the residential zones, the R1 zones. So I'm proposing to renumber and reorder those sections so that they're alphabetical. And it's just for ease of use for people to use the bylaw. The zoning bylaw is complicated enough without not having the sections in alphabetical order. Similar to that, there's a table in the zoning bylaw that lists all the zone symbols, their section numbers and the zone names. If you reorder them and put them alphabetical, that table would need to be updated as well. It was also noticed that the maximum zone coverage for row house dwellings wasn't changing, but we were changing it for all the other residential types like single detached dwellings, converted dwellings, dwelling with supports, and that changing the zone coverage, not to increase the amount the main building could be, but actually setting some additional space aside for a detached structure, like if they want a small shed. We have run into issues in the past where the builder built out to the maximum zone coverage, sold the units, and then the homeowners, once they were in there for a period of time, realized they really need some room for just a small 8x8 shed. And we didn't have any zone coverage left for them. They had to come back and either do a rezoning or a minor variance. This would allow that additional few meters so that they have a smaller accessory building in the row house dwellings, just like we're proposing for the single detached and other dwellings as well. And then finally, for clarity's purposes, to move the ARU provisions from a general provision to the actual zone for which they apply. And that would, and then also the way they were worded, it was a little confusing around what was happening with partially or privately serviced properties. In fact, they would only have one ARU, and also what the size requirement would be, and that was to be at least 4,000 square meters. So it's not a change, but it's a reordering of where it's located and some clarification around the language so that it's easier to identify what those provisions are. So that's all of what occurred up to today. I'd like to try to quickly run through the various areas and the changes that are being brought forth. I've grouped them based on the area that's affected. First would be the agricultural area to permit additional residential units. So that's like an apartment in the main dwelling, or it could be a separate dwelling. If it's a commercial farm, those are the ones that have the AG1 zoning in our zoning bylaw. A maximum of 2 ARUs are proposed, of which one could be in a detached unit. So you could two additional ones in the house, or you could have one in a separate building, and then you could still have one in the house as well. If it's detached, there'd be requirements that it be located within 60 meters of the main dwelling. That reflects comments we received from the Huron County Federation of Agriculture. Going across the county to the various municipalities, we had initially suggested 30 meters. The comment from the Federation was that that's really too close to make it work. You need more space when you're working around maybe existing mature trees, where the septic system is, where an existing drive shed might be. So we've increased that to 60 meters from the main dwelling. The ARU would need to use the same laneway and meet the required front yard setback and MDS setback of the main house as well. For our smaller rural residential lots, the AG4 lots, one ARU would be permitted in either the main dwelling or as a detached unit. There would be requirements if it's detached, again, within 60 meters of the main dwelling, use the same laneway. In this case, would need to be located to the rear or side of the existing house, and then meet the other main building setbacks as well for the AG4 and the MDS requirements as well. The other significant change in the agricultural area would be to allow on-farm worker housing to be permanent housing rather than seasonal, expand the eligible building types as well, and then increase the number of dwelling units permitted to a maximum of 6 units. So that's 6 separate units. There's no restriction on the number of bedrooms, but in terms of there'd be 6 complete units, up to 6 with washroom facilities, kitchen facilities, living, and then 1 or more bedrooms, depending on the needs of that particular farmer. And this reflects applications we've had to have that occur. Haters, turkeys would be the most recent example. We've had inquiries. We have the greenhouse businesses who've been using seasonal workers. That's now become more permanent type workers as well. And there's just been a general need for more permanent housing as opposed to seasonal housing. So that's the additional addition to occur in the agricultural area. So we're adding more housing in the agricultural area. The next item would be in the official plan to balance that off and reiterate that our strong agricultural economy requires this housing, but we're not allowing the decentralization of general housing onto prime agricultural lands. And that's just to reflect what's been the position of the municipality and your former municipalities around the importance of preserving good farmland for farming and farmers' use. And then finally, the AG2 zone, which is the zone used for the retained farmland from a surplus resident severance, add a cannabis production facility as a permitted use. We currently already permit marijuana growing in the AG1 use. This would all add it to the AG2 as well. And the other item would be to remove any worker housing on the AG2 land as a permitted use. The provincial policy statement says you cannot have housing on the retained land after you've severed off the house. So this would fix that up, especially now that we're otherwise providing permanent on-farm housing. The on-farm diversified use policies, which is on-farm businesses that are used to diversify or expand the income sources for the farmer, that would be updated to reflect a wider range of farm businesses. In particular, we're proposing, in addition to the retail sale of farm products produced on the farm, that they could also sell farm products that were produced within 50 kilometers of the farm. So if there's another farmer who's producing a product on farm and maybe does not want to get into selling it themselves on the farm, they could sell it through this other farmer as well. So you could have a number of local products available through this one location on the farm. The sixth item would be to clarify that the minimum distance separation for both those on-farm diversified uses and agricultural, commercial, industrial uses, those are AG3 uses. There would be no MDS between the two of them. Those uses all locate in the rural area. They're all aware of what the impacts are, and they are not, in particular, they're not permanent housing uses as well. So they would not be subject to MDS. It also means it doesn't restrict new agricultural uses, livestock uses from expanding because those uses are in proximity. The other MDS change would be to treat all our cemeteries as type A land uses. That's a single distance. Otherwise, they could be a type B, which is a double distance, is the default in the MDS, but the MDS guidelines do allow council to set it as a single distance, the type A. And that's come from experience across the county where it's really not the livestock barn itself that generates complaints with respect to cemeteries. It's more often manure spreading. And manure spreading is not something that's dealt with by MDS. It's not dealt with through the zoning. It's a normal farm practice. Since livestock barns are not the issue, we're proposing that those only be at a single distance rather than a double distance. For our agricultural small holding zone, remove converted dwelling as a permitted use, remove livestock limitations, and update the location requirements for buildings that have livestock. There was just recently, in terms of the last number of years, it was identified that the livestock limitations we have in the zoning bylaw, which which usually limit it to 4 nutrient units, that's actually a provision that's inoperable. It's covered by the Nutrient Management Act, and we don't have the ability to restrict the amount of livestock in a barn. So if we leave it to MDS and there's some updated location requirements that would pull and draw on MDS, the impact is going to be an opportunity for hobby farms, very small farms or livestock barns on these AG4 parcels. You know, if you want to have a couple of horses, some chickens, a goat or something like that, that you can probably do that and meet the MDS on many of our AG4 parcels. You're not going to get a commercial livestock operation locating on an AG4. It's just too small to meet MDS. And then finally, in the agricultural area, just to clarify that the sale of forest products that's permitted as part of a general agricultural use is for products that are cultivated and produced on site. It's that way for all the other types of products produced as part of a general agricultural use, but for some reason it didn't mention that for forest products, and we like to keep that the same, so we're suggesting that be updated. Moving to our urban settlement areas, so that's our villages and hamlets and the town of Exeter. Whether they're fully or partially or privately serviced, they're all urban settlement areas. The proposal is to allow 2 ARUs which is an additional residential unit in the R1, R2, and R3 zones in fully serviced settlement areas. So that's Exeter, Centralia, Huron Park, Crediton, and then just north of Grand Bend, there's a bit that's also fully serviced. We would permit a single ARU for a single detached dwelling in the other settlement areas, the partially and privately serviced settlement areas. And that limitation to 1 rather than 2 is primarily due to concerns about the fact they're going to be on septic systems. There'd be a general provision added allowing new semi-detached duplex and converted dwellings or requiring those converted dwellings and duplexes, semi-detached and triplexes to be on full services. So in the R1 zone, all of those would need to be in full services. If you're in, say, Shipka, for example, that's an R1 zone. The only thing available to you would be a single detached dwelling, and you could, through the ARU provisions, apply for a single ARU as well. Number 12 would be to permit mobile homes to be used as detached ARUs in our residential zones. We have 2 local manufacturers of that type of housing, so adding that as an option would support those local businesses. 13, there's a number of definitions that need to be fine-tuned and revised to reflect the wording in the bylaw. For example, we had townhouse. We're not going to call it a row house. We have multiple unit dwelling, which was an apartment, or it could have been a street townhouse. There was some confusing language. We're going to settle that down to just a few terms as well. And then there's also dwelling with supports, which was previously called a group home. We broadened that out to include a hospice, a respite care facility, transitional housing. All of those would be called dwelling with supports, and they'd be available both in the R1, R2, and R3 zones. A group home is currently permitted in those zones as well. We would just widen that out. The R1 zone then becomes the zone for up to 3 dwelling units. And as a result, we're including triplexes in the R1 zone. And multiple unit dwellings would be added to the R2 zone up to 3 stories in height. That's part of achieving the increased density that council requested. We remove the unit maximums for row houses in the R2 zone. Currently, it's 4 units. That would be removed. And then there's some parking revisions. Dwelling with supports would be set at 2 spaces. The Huron County Housing Corporation, any of their units at a 1/4 space per unit. So 1 for every 4 units. That's based on their experience. They have a facility where that's actually the number that's actually gets used. So there's a lot of unused parking in that location. It won't be that way at all of their facilities. They will put in the number of parking spaces that are needed based on who those renters are anticipated to be. And generally through the parking changes, it's about being more market-based and allowing the market to determine what they need in order to meet the market that they're aiming for. And we would just set kind of the bare minimum. The C5 zone. C5 zone is our mixed commercial zone. It's found in Exeter at the edge of our downtown. We have the downtown C4 zone, and then immediately outside of that along Main Street is the C5 zone, which has both commercial and residential uses. It didn't have a specific identification of how that residential use would be determined for parking requirements. It was lumped in with the commercial aspect. We're proposing to set it at 1 space per unit so that it's clear. If you have an apartment, you need to provide a space. And then the triplex and quadruplex, I already mentioned that. We're bringing them into the bylaw. For row houses, include a requirement for one unenclosed space per unit. What we see happening with row houses, especially interior units, being fairly small, even if they have an attached garage, that often tends not to be used as car storage parking. It's used for other storage. So we would require one unenclosed space. So there would need to be space in front of that garage for parking. And then along with changing parking, one of the requests we've had is around tandem parking. So one car parked behind another car. That's not currently permitted. You have to have an access aisle. This change would allow tandem parking to be used for buildings with less than 5 units. So if you've got a driveway that's long enough that you can have one behind the other, that would actually be 2 parking spaces. If you have a double wide drive that's one behind the other, you could actually have 4 spaces. And that's not uncommon for how people use their driveway if it happens to be deep enough that they can park one behind the other. We would just now allow that as part of meeting the parking requirements. Also increased flexibility with offsite parking. We currently allow offsite parking for just the commercial zones. The proposal is to open that up for all zones, that they don't have to provide their required parking on site. If there's another location they can make arrangements within 150 meters, there needs to be an agreement in order to get that in place. They could use that to meet their requirements as well. So it provides more flexibility and a more efficient use of land. Number 18, there's more, again, with the mixed commercial development C5 zone, there's further requirements around residential development. It goes into a little bit more detail for those areas. In particular, if there's a triplex, a question of, well, what zone provisions do I use? It would now be clear that you use the R1 zone provisions. If you're going to use a multiple attached, then you're into the R2 zone provisions as well. So it points you to the right zone to know what the setbacks are that you need to meet as well. And then generally, number 19, standardize our interior side yard setbacks, move from 3 meters and 1.8 meters to 1.5 meters on for all interior side yards for all building types, except for the larger ones like the quadruplexes or the multiple unit dwellings. And that comes out of the special zones you would have seen in our recent developments, Buckingham Estates, Yellowstone. They came with requirements to reduce the side yards as well. So this would help standardize what that is. It also helps when we're dealing with existing areas. If someone's putting in an infill development, having a more standardized 1.5 meter side yard makes it easier for them to fit the lot in there and wouldn't need, for example, a minor variance as part of their severance application. And then the next one deals with the zone coverage. I touched on that earlier about setting aside some space for accessory buildings as part of that. In terms of standardizing not just the interior side yard setback, but also the front yard setback for our single detached, semi-detached, duplex converted dwellings from the current 7 meters, or sorry, 7.5 meters, and for row houses it's 7 meters. Move that all to a 4.5 meter setback for the main dwelling and 6 meters for an attached garage. And the 6 meters is the depth of a parking space. So that would allow parking in front of the attached garage, but it would let them to get closer with the house to the street, make better use of the land. It also puts more eyes on the street, especially if they have an attached porch out front, they sit out front. It helps build a sense of community as people are walking by. You can say hi, what you're doing, and that sort of piece as well. Number 22 is removing the linked semi-detached dwelling. That's a dwelling type that's not being used. It looks like 2 singles, but they're actually attached below ground by a foundation wall. Nobody builds those anymore. It's more expensive and it doesn't have any benefits over building either 2 semis or building a semi or building 2 singles. So I'm proposing it be removed. For multiple unit dwellings, remove the regulation regarding common walkways location. That can be dealt through site plan control. And then reduce the outdoor amenity requirements to a single communal outdoor amenity requirement of 100 square meters, but require it to be either square or rectangular in shape. So that you don't get someone that just kind of wanders all over the place that really can't be used by the residents in a good manner. And then there's provisions to automatically recognize those semi-detached duplex, triplexes, quadruplexes, row houses, even multiple unit dwellings when they're subdivided. So if there's an application to split a semi-detached dwelling in the 2 units into 2 separate lots, if the severance is approved and there's a public notification and comment period as part of that, and if that's approved, then it would automatically be recognized. There'd be no need for a separate either rezoning or minor variance application. Same with a multiple unit dwelling like an apartment building. If they want to go from rental to a condominium, there is a planning application required as part of that. But if there's any deficiencies, they would be recognized automatically once that condo corporation was registered. And then number 25 would be adding a new residential zone called residential greenfield, RG1. That would be for undeveloped areas that we have. It's a pre-zoning idea. We would zone them RG1 before there's even an application for a residential subdivision. It would set out a minimum density requirement, in this case, 15 main dwelling units per hectare. There could be more dwelling units if they have ARUs, but there would be at least 15 main dwelling units. And then for those areas that are abutting an existing residential area, proposed to have an RG1-1. It's a special zone that talks about the transition. So there would, in that first 50 meters between an R1 or R2 property within that new subdivision, they would not be able to put any R3 uses. So you couldn't put a large apartment building that close to an existing developed R1 or R2 zoned property. We also require the design of residential development, whether it's infill or some form of intensification within our established areas, to demonstrate compliance with the county's residential intensification guidelines. So that's would be an OP policy to be added. And then breweries and microbreweries. We've had some inquiries related to microbreweries, and it's not exactly clear where they fit. The interpretation has been they fit in the M1 light industrial zone as opposed to the more heavier general M2 zone. So the proposal is to add microbrewery as a permitted use in the M1 light industrial zone and brewery as a permitted use in the M2 general industrial zone. There are no changes proposed for the Lakeshore residential in terms of development opportunities. Additional residential units would continue to not be permitted within the Lakeshore residential designation or LR zone. The only thing that shows up in the amendments is a 1-sentence change that would be added to the OP to reflect that. Whether that stays in or not wouldn't change the current situation where they are not permitted. And then the natural environment area, the permitted maximum ground floor area for accessory buildings is really quite large, considering they're only supposed to be used for equipment related to maintaining trails, walkways, small bridges, that sort of thing. This is well over 1,000 square feet. It's proposed to reduce that in half to roughly about 540 square feet, 50 square meters. Medical marijuana production facility would be replaced with cannabis production facility throughout the zoning bylaw, and that's to reflect that cannabis is now available and can be legally produced for more than medical purposes as well. And it does include some setback requirements as part of that proposal. Some clarity that all residential uses are subject to the sewage treatment facility buffer overlay. That's a 100 or 150 meter piece where no residential uses are to establish. The current wording in the bylaw doesn't do a good job of covering everything off. It sort of says it does, and then it doesn't provide all the examples. So this would clean that up and make it clear. The second last one is when it comes to new residential lot creation in our partially or privately serviced settlement areas, including the lake shore, they would need to comply with the provincial requirements for nitrates. That's a Ministry of Environment guideline, a D54 is what it's called. And we have a terms of reference for the consultants to do those studies so that they can better price what the work that needs to be done. And then there's no issues around the process they use to go through and come up with a recommendation on what the size of the lot needs to be in order to make sure that the nitrates meet the acceptable levels set by the ministry. And then finally, to clarify that the latest federal legislation is always referred to in the zoning bylaw. There's a general provision that says that for provincial, it doesn't speak to federal. That never used to be much of a concern, but now with cannabis, there are federal requirements. And they've been evolving. So we need to add that to make sure that we're always read the bylaw in relation to the latest federal legislation as well. I missed the last four. There's some redundant provisions that are repeated multiple times in the bylaw. They're taken out. The result of some of those changes is we can reduce the bylaw by about 4 pages. So there'll be 4 pages fewer text as a result of cleaning things up and shortening it up. There's provisions currently that talk about storage containers. We would clarify that storage containers that have been disassembled and are actually being used as a building material in compliance with the Ontario Building Code aren't restricted or prohibited from use. That comes out of an Ontario Land Tribunal that occurred in a neighboring municipality to the north, where the board chair was clear in the decision that it's storage containers that have been disassembled are a building material, not something that gets regulated through zoning. We would also add roads and trails to the list of public services and utilities not regulated by the zoning bylaw. Things like your roads, any utilities, they're not regulated. We have been interpreting the roads and trails to be in that list. This would make that clear as well. And then the last one is the alphabetizing of sections 4 through 40 and reordering that to clean it up. That is all of the changes that are proposed, and my recommendation has been that both amendments be approved. In the official plan amendment, it would be adopted and forwarded to the county for approval, and the zoning bylaw would be something that you as council could approve directly. And always, I'm making my comments in advance of you hearing what the public has to say. You should give them careful thought and consideration before you make your decision. And that, sorry, I went so long, Mayor Finch, is the amendment.
Well done. Well done, Mr. Metzger. Well done. Any questions or comments from members of council at this time? Councilor Oak, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Thanks, Craig, for the Coles Notes version. And a couple thank yous for the marked up version on the website now. That was painful trying to piecemeal everything together on the versions, which I made note of at the public meeting. And then the Huron County nitrate information that's required, was unaware that that's not done by the Huron Perth Health Unit anymore. It's been passed over to the county as part of the process. So that was a learning. One question I have is on the ARUs. So in an AG1 zone, and I know the Federation commented on the 60 meters. I guess we're seeing a lot more interest or applications for houses or barn dominiums or however you want to call them. And just wondering, is that 60 meters the right number in the scenarios that you guys have seen with those applications? Because I know a lot of people that'll put up a shed and it seems like it's a lot more than 60 meters away from the house per se, and just wanting to make sure that we're not gonna have to ask for a lot of exemptions if somebody is asking for that. I just wondered if that 60 meters is sufficient. You know, we don't want the footprint to be huge, taking up agricultural land either. We wanted the footprint smaller for the building size, but want to be respectful of making sure that it's the right size.
Mr. Metzger, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mayor Finch, to Councillor Oak. It is something new for us, so there may be minor variance applications. We're going to monitor the situation and see if there are applications. Should it have been 70? And we may need to revisit that based on our experiences. But yes, 60 is kind of, it's our best guess of what we think will work, and we'll monitor as we go forward. And we may need to revise that number based on experience.
Thank you. Councillor Oak, go ahead.
Thanks. Just as a follow-up in the AG4 world, had this question in my other life this week about a scenario if somebody were looking at an AG4 property and they wanted to take down the house and put up a broiler barn, for example. Would that be allowable on the way we've got this worded here under an AG4 property? If the minimum distance is satisfied and you know, all the other, I guess I just wondering, we're seeing some people, because of $30,000 or $40,000 an acre land, people are looking at potentially other ideas of properties to, you know, build a barn on to expand instead of buying a $4 million farm. If they can buy a $500,000 AG4 property and tear down the house and build a barn right there and not have they don't need the land per se that they already have.
Mr. Metzger.
Yes, in response, if someone buys an AG4, tears down the house, they won't be able to get a building permit to put up the broiler barn. It's a residential lot, so they'll have to have that house there. Now, if they keep the house, that's a different question. And even then, I'm doubtful they're going to be able to meet the MDS piece and able to make that fit.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments at this point from members of council before I go to the public? Councillor Vaughn, go ahead, please.
Yes, Craig, thank you for the presentation, and thank you for all the comments you and Denise gave to Councillor Oak and myself when we attended the open house. Couple of things that I would like to bring up. Item 28, it talked about the natural environment, and I don't recall reading that piece, but tonight you brought it to our attention, where we're reducing the ground floor area of accessory buildings by half. And I just wondered why that is needed. What is there a call for that? Is it impacting nearby lands?
Mr. Metzger.
Sure. In response, we haven't had a direct issue in South Huron, but other municipalities with a building that large of over 1,000 square feet, we've seen them attempt to be used for uses that are not permitted in that natural environment zone. It's used for, they want to use it for more than just the storage of equipment related to maintaining those conservation uses. In particular, there was a question of whether this was actually going to turn into a cottage in the woodlot. So there would actually be a cabin in the woods, and that's not permitted in that natural environment zone whatsoever. So it's a very large number, and what we found is that it's larger than it needs to be, and probably by double what it needs to be. So across the county, we're proposing that they be brought back to the 50 square meters, and that's what other municipalities have adopted.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you for that. Yes, so there when we were going through this whole process with council about opening up housing, basically, across South Huron for the benefit of the people. We had some very positive messages, and there are definitely some very positive messages in this whole presentation. But there are a couple of items that I was not expecting going through the documentation. And one of them was about the ARU references to the Lakeshore area, both a proposed change in the zoning bylaw and a proposed change in the official plan. In the zoning area, in the Lakeshore zones, as you know today, there is a provision as a use for a guest house, which doesn't have plumbing of any sort. And so by nature of the very fact of how the uses are explained today, an additional residential unit doesn't actually fit anyway. That whole area is interested in having either a secondary plan or an official plan. My preference would be to, if this is considered a housekeeping item, to move it till we actually do our official plan review in 2024 and address it all at that time. The other one that is a concern to me is the nitrates, in terms of there's different applications for different types of settlement areas, and there's different lot sizes that, like, a new lot is a bigger size than potentially and change in a residential use. Anyway, I found it most confusing, and I would like to see us move that topic to a committee of the whole meeting where we could actually talk about it in some detail, so I could understand exactly how this affects all of the little settlement areas that are in my ward that are not on full services today. So those are my comments.
Thank you. Any other comments from members of council at this time? Councillor Neeb, go ahead.
Item 25, which says talking about the density threshold of 15 main dwelling units per hectare. Has there been any provision in the past about density, a specific density?
We do in the official plan. We don't have it in the zoning bylaw. We set minimums, we don't set maximums. So it meant when you got on the ground, those lots can be, single detached can be a very, very large lot. This would provide some guidance. We have had some specific special policies that talk to density requirements, but again, it's all on the official plan. This would be the first time we'd bring something into the zoning bylaw so that it's clear when someone acquires a property and wishes to develop it, what the minimum density thresholds we're looking for. They may come back with proposals that are beyond that, but this is the minimum to get through the door to start the conversation.
Thank you. There's no further questions from members of council. I'll turn to Madam Clerk for members of the public.
Karen Rollins Beneteau.
Welcome, Karen.
Hello? Is it working? All right.
If
My
you just
name is
move,
Karen Rollins
if you just
Beneteau.
move the mic up a little bit, just so it
Little
can catch. Yeah, thanks.
How is that?
Perfect. Yeah.
All right. My name is Karen Rollins Beneteau, and I live in a tiny house in Exeter in my own backyard. My tiny house was built as a workshop in about 2013 by a previous owner. I bought the property in 2015 with the goal of changing the workshop into a tiny house on a foundation. It's 16 by 20 feet or 320 square feet, roughly the size of a 1.5 car garage. I currently rent out the main dwelling to a family of 5. With the new bylaws coming up to allow for more detached and attached additional residential units, I would like to discuss the advantages to welcoming them in our neighborhoods and backyards. According to Polling Canada, earlier this month. Only 20% of Canadians are in favor of changing single-family homes into triplexes in order to add more density. I want to change everyone's minds on that and explain the advantages. In the US, where people can live in tiny houses on wheels much easier than in Canada, 40% of tiny house dwellers are over the age of 50, and 40% are between 30 and 50, and the last 20% are less than 30 years old. And more women live in tiny houses than men. In 2017, it was reported that the largest group of people interested in living in small dwellings were women over 50. However, with the housing crisis, there's an increased interest with younger groups. My tiny house is the size of a 1.5 car garage. We have many garages on private properties in South Huron Municipality. Realistically, cars can live outside, but people can't. Appropriate housing is the right kind of housing for the right person or persons. We send off our young adult children to university or college, and their school provides at a cost appropriate housing in the form of an 8x10 room with a shared kitchen and a shared bathroom. And we as a society have accepted this as appropriate housing for that stage of life. When our elderly family members can no longer take care of themselves and we have exhausted all ways to help them, we put them in an appropriate housing in the form of a nursing home or retirement home, sometimes with an 8x10 room with a shared bathroom and a common eating area. We as a society have accepted this as appropriate housing for this stage of life. What about the in-between stages? The typical home in today's age is 3 to 5 bedrooms and rarely just 1 bathroom. I don't consider this appropriate housing for a single person who only needs enough space for a single bed, 1 living room chair, and a table for 1, but still wants to own a home with a backyard, vegetable garden, and a driveway. Converting garages or building additional residential units will provide appropriate housing for more people. A person may choose to buy a house to rent out and put up a garden suite that meets their simplified needs. So I've listed 10 reasons why we should allow these into our communities and why we should welcome them. The number one thing, it creates great personal investment strategies. If you build an additional residential unit in your backyard and rent it out, you would get a pretty good return on your investment, better than a bank. The advantages of having this kind of rental in the community is the fact that the landlord will be living on the same property, so there won't be an absent landlord problem. This results in the property being better taken care of than if the landlord was in a different neighborhood or city. Number 2, second units and garden suites, also known as additional dwelling units, keep seniors out of long-term care longer. Either by moving them into a tiny house and subsequently decreasing the size of their residence, making upkeep easier, or by moving someone into the tiny house who can gradually take over more care of the property and then become a caregiver. It's a lot easier to bring Granny's hot dinner to her house that's a few steps away out the back door than traveling across town or bringing a week's supplies of frozen dinners to her in another community. And number 3, financially assisting homeowners. Having an option of renting out a portion or all of your home or additional residential units for added income can bring added financial security to help people who are living paycheck to paycheck. This will assist them if a loss of income happens. Boomerang children. Life often takes unexpected changes, and it's so nice to have a safety net to fall back into when life is falling apart. Many of today's young adults move back home after being out on their own, which is difficult for parents and for the young adult. Having a separate home in your backyard or apartment in your house keeps some degree of independence and peace for all family members. Adult children also may move back after a divorce or losing their spouse. In some cases, they may be returning with young children. They're boomerang children who need multi-generational housing. Number 5, as additional residential units create multi-generational housing. Young parents can live in close proximity to extended families. Active grandparents can help their adult children balance career and family by being involved in the grandchildren's lives and providing childcare and light housework while the parents are working. It's also a great way for siblings to live on the same lot and to share childcare for both young families. Strong families who support each other create strong communities. Student housing. Many people look for placements in Huron County for their school placements. When I ran an Airbnb, I had doctors come who were doing their internship in rural Ontario, as well as nursing students. I also had agency nurses who come and had brief placements at Exeter Villa. Additional housing helps in all these things. Number 7, providing with relatives with special needs. Building an additional dwelling unit allows you to meet the needs of someone with special needs who wants independence but still needs help occasionally. Light fixtures and plugs can be put at the right heights from the start. Doorways made the right width. The bathroom can be structured to allow for independence. Countertop heights can be put at the most optimal height. This is an affordable option for families to care for their loved ones with dignity and respect. Allowing people to adopt a minimalist, number 8 is allowing people to adopt a minimalist lifestyle when it comes to housing. Minimalism is not for everyone, but many people are trying it out and they should have the opportunities to do it. It's a great opportunity to become debt-free and focus on the important people in your life and be able to free up finances and time to focus on a bucket list or to seek adventure or travel. Some people find it's a good fit and decide not to go back to their old ways, and others use minimalism to get debt-free or to save for a better lifestyle. And the last one, millennial housing. Millennials are having a difficult time entering the workforce and finding jobs that will support themselves and pay back student debt. In many cases, to get entry-level jobs in their field, they have to leave their hometowns and start fresh in another community without family support. Having options to rent a tiny or a small additional dwelling unit at a lower price than an apartment will help pay off student debt and get them on their feet faster. They generally don't have things to furnish a standard apartment, and this helps them with reducing extra costs involved with living on their own for the first time. It also prevents them from being in subsidized housing with taxpayers helping with housing costs. Young people should have an option of being self-supportive. In closing, these instances listed here in favor of tiny houses in the form of additional residential units are not examples of poverty housing, but instead appropriate housing. In fact, none of these options scream out a knee-jerk reaction of not in my backyard. Instead, these examples are families helping family and giving people help with housing while maintaining dignity and respect. To me, it sounds like a way to strengthen communities. When you create appropriate housing in a way that brings more income to some citizens, reduces expenses to other citizens, reduces subsidized housing, group homes, and all types of publicly funded housing, and creates a larger tax base in your community, everybody wins. The advantage of the tiny house movement are many, and with extended insight, I'm glad that this movement is being driven forward by municipalities. I strongly believe that more additional residential units in garages and backyards will be a huge asset to our community.
Thank you, Karen. That was very well done.
All right, thank you very much.
Really, you're a real champion for the tiny homes. And as you know, we've talked, I've taken people past your home many times and explained how well that works. So
It
was
does
very well
work
done.
excellent.
It does. It's great and it works perfectly for your property. Any questions for Karen at this point? No? Great. Thanks very much, Karen. Well
Okay,
done.
thank you very much.
You bet. Next one, please.
Janet Caress.
Janet, welcome.
Janet Koresh on 87 Dunes Drive, Grand Bend, South Huron. Always have to add that South Huron part. Through you, Mayor Finch, I have a question for Mr. Metzger. And I would also ask council to reread my email letter that I submitted. It's I believe, a part of your package. Because my question is in the context of that letter. Mr. Metzger, could you please explain or describe the official plan review process? Thank you.
Mr. Metzger.
Yes, this official plan review process, we're speaking about what's planned for 2024. That's section 26. There's a requirement under the Planning Act that at least every 5 years, the municipality review their official plan. And that's a major review. You review all aspects. Usually the one of the bigger items is there a need for more land to be identified for development? In terms of expansions of settlement areas, there will have been probably changes in municipal or provincial legislation. So some updates related to that. There may be new information available in this case in terms of work that's been done at the county level. In the county's case, we did a natural environment update. So there's that information that's available, will be made available for council's consideration. So you're looking at all aspects of the official plan and determining what needs to be updated in council's opinion. So that's a process. Like other amendments, there is a consultation aspect. That particular process mandates an open house as well as a public meeting. The other amendments, such as the one we're in right now, you're not required to do an open house, but we did one anyway. So there's a little bit more consultation required with the official plan review.
Thank you, Mr. Metzger. And our next subject is Madam Clerk.
There's no one else on the list unless there's anyone else present.
Is there any other members of the public who'd like to speak at this point? Mr. Shriyam, come on down, please. And Bob, if you could just mention, state your name and your address, please. Microphone too.
Push the button. Okay, I got it. My name is Bob Schramm, 27 Lake Shore, South Huron. And I am a big believer in doing the official plan. There are a lot of things that seem to be moving around the deck chairs here that you've already sort of dealt with. Now we're changing our minds. You went through a process of special provision to reduce lot sizes for some of the people. Then you decided those lot sizes were too small and you couldn't put a shed on it. Now we're making them small again, and you're reducing things to the absolute minimum. And the first thing that's going to happen, somebody's going to ask for a variance. And you just gave all your variances away, but they're still going to ask. Talked about microbreweries. I live in London. On the corner of Central Ave and Richmond Street, in the heart of London, there's a microbrewery, not an M1, not an M2. On the corner of Tavistock, Stop and Don't Stop, there's a microbrewery. I think you're, for some reason, you just want to rush into these things. There are legislative issues. There's lots of time for consultation. So I don't know why you just don't slow down and really look at the implications. The presentation about the tiny homes was a perfect example of intensity densification, utilizing the assets you have in the ground and making something happen. I don't think you're really, with due respect, you're just too fast. And as elected politicians, I frankly feel sorry for you, because it's a complex matter and I don't think you're getting into the in-depth considerations. The farming situation, setting the artificial 60 meters where you have no example of there being a problem, but you want to create a problem, you define it, and then you now have a problem. All of that area of farm utilization and of migrant workers, temporary workers, sorry, wrong term, is a really important thing. They need housing. They need affordable housing. Once again, the tiny homes. All the service workers in the Grand Bend area, they can't live there. It's too expensive. The Medway homes are building there right now. The starting price is $790,000. The Tridon development is going to be of the same area. These are not houses that are going to support the community. So I would encourage you to slow down. Every 5 years, an official plan is supposed to be done. And I think Mr. Metzger would agree that you're way behind on your duty. And so there are different thresholds. Even the alphabetizing, I think that's a great idea. It should be an appendix to the plan, so you can change it anytime, because you're going to come up with a new term and you're going to have a new bylaw. I mean, it's kind of silly stuff. But I wish you well for all of our souls and sakes. And I would, once again, I just ask you to slow it down. 2024 in my calendar is 2 months away. that's when you're supposed to be doing the new official plan. So I take the time, do it. You know what? On all of these definitions and things, somehow your municipality is working in the absence of all of those things. You have triplexes, quadplexes, duplexes, row houses. You have out west, those strata houses that have the joint foundations are the standard. But in my world, if nobody wants it, you don't have to change your bylaw for something that nobody wants. Just leave it alone until you do the official plan, then make your decision. So I wish everyone a good evening, and had I known, I thought someone else was going to be here, so my remarks are a little off the cuff. So, but thank you.
Thank you much, Mr. Schramm. Anyone else? Nobody else? Is there anyone else that'd like to speak? Okay, seeing nothing there. Go to item number 5 then. Mr. Coulson.
I'm just going to bring up that Councillor Vaughn did mention about a recommendation to possibly take a look at this a little bit further at a committee of the whole type workshop for was at least the nitrate piece. I wasn't sure. I just bring that up for council consideration.
I'll go to Councillor Vaughn first. Councillor Vaughn, any comments on that at this point? It was your subject.
Sorry, not beyond what I already said. I do think it would be wise for us to have a committee of the whole to talk about some of the things that are in this presentation and changes that were not necessarily talked about in previous council meetings.
Okay, thank you.
And so,
Councillor Oak, sorry.
Yeah, I agree with Councillor Vaughn. And I'd second a recommendation if that was the case. My other thought is with the committee of the whole would be, I believe there's a discussion coming up shortly with the parking. Parking is a major item in this update as well. So I think more discussion on that and the need. We are in rural Ontario, and there is public transit, but to a certain extent, but we need more access to vehicles, and so parking is something that we definitely have to pay attention to in any of this intensification that goes on. So I'm just wondering if that could be part of the meeting or some discussion, maybe not the parking bylaw review that we were looking at doing, but further discussion about parking with all these changes.
Ms. Masuda Coulson, you want to comment?
And I'd also like to comment, we had a preliminary discussion with Mr. Metzger about a possible date for further discussion. And if council so chooses, November 15th would work, and planner Van Amersfoort would be able to attend the meeting as well.
Very well. So we have a request for a committee of the whole, moved by Councillor Vaughn, second by Councillor Oak. Any discussion on that? Call a question on Councillor Neeb, go ahead.
Would that be at 6 p.m.?
That would be a committee of the whole, so it'd be at 4 p.m.
For some reason, I have in my calendar, I have a fire services meeting.
Okay, so if that date does not work, then staff can send out a doodle poll.
It's 22nd. Okay, sorry. My error.
We're good?
Okay, so November 15th, 4 p.m. November 15th, 4 p.m.
I'm going to the pig roast, the pigtail and barbecue out at Kirkton on the 15th, and I'm not going to miss that.
Not anymore, you're not.
No.
Okay. That's up to you, Councillor Dietrich.
Okay.
So 15th, yes.
Okay.
Okay. So we have a mover and a seconder. If there's any further discussion, call the question all in favor. And that carries 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Thank you very much. That carries. Ms. Masuda Coulson.
That South Huron Council now closes the public meeting at 6:10 p.m.
Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Neeb. Any discussion? Call the question all in favor. That carries a 6. Thank you.